3. Bootstrapping. We travel! The rusty surface of Gallifrey, blotched with brown lakes and dust-grey clouds, spun beneath them and was eclipsed by darkness, devoured by the vortex void into which the chronauts were hurled. This brief and unexpected mental image, so startling to the first ever time travellers, still came as a shock to all those who followed on later missions. The total break from the world and reality to which they were native was like the severing of the umbilical cord that ties all that is born with existence. They were alone in the dark with only each other's thoughts to cling to. For a moment, in a cluster of moments, surrounded by no moments at all, hope and time trickled away into nothing. There was a click. The toy ounce ape whirled into life, spinning and tumbling across the floor on its whirling arms. The chronauts heard the pilot's giggle. "This way," he said aloud. "Soon be there." 1 minute since immersion. The spheric pool hovering above the time scafe's heart shimmered up an image of the astral vortex outside the ship. Cascades of rainbow light streamed from a far point, forming a tunnel along which the scaphe passed. The chronauts reclined on couches that lay like spokes around the wheel of the chamber. Their heads that drove the ship rested against the wheel hub in whose hollowed centre sat the pilot, playing with his toys. Only occasionally the child tapped his fingers on a hovering grid of coloured light that guided the scaphe through time's convoluted vectors. The crew watched the streaming light play in the pool above their heads as they travelled up time or down time. It was an illusion. No one alive had seen or could imagine the vortex real. It was an unproven dimension which existed only in theory, and so they were travellers within its boundaries, bootstrapping their way across its coursing tumult, bringing now to the future or the past, in concert with laws more akin to the superstitions of the suet workers in the city. Complexities in the scaphe's sustainers created the illusion of flight as a courtesy for the crew. The synthetic air in the chamber was already sluggish and warm. It was no different to 100 simulations they had been through, but if they returned home from the flight, they would be pioneers. If they did not, they were martyrs. Captain Peccary had no need to watch his companions. The fusion of their minds as a crew told him everything. The scaphe's course had been chosen and preset. 90 minutes immersion in vortex to emerge into real time 90 days after departure. Peccary closed his eyes and could still see their passage through the vortex. They had simply to think, "We travel!" and they went. Only the pilot thought separately. We travel! The thought core of the crew, bound and woven by 3 years of training, virtually eliminated the necessity for a reality. 6 minds in one pool, a microcosmic pool of awareness, shared thoughts in a harmonic ratio, except the loss of chronaut Tasper from the crew had disturbed them all in its suddenness. A freak skimmerboat accident among the marsh lanes near the city, only 61 days before their mission commenced. Tasper, a proven quantum theorist and the crew's confirmed joker, who also acted as their pilot's guardian, responsible for the young navigator's welfare. They had all loved him. A hurried investigation blamed the crash on a corroded fuel plug and a pocket of volatile marsh gas. The mishap was unpredictable and unfortunate. Such are the ways of the gods. Since the time programme could not be delayed, Tasper was interred with full posthumous honour and the mission dedicated to his memory. The affair was tidied away with efficiency and reverence. But all the crew had felt his scream and tasted mud as imagined water choked their lungs. The pilot had inevitably taken the loss of his nanny hardest. His had been the strongest bond, but it had not been easy for any of the crew to accept Tasper's replacement into their tightly woven telepathic family. Peccary detected hints of unease in his second officer. Chronaut Amnoni Distuisor Lorizon, daughter of the ancient house of Blyledge, had been chosen for her qualities as a natural questioner and antagonist. Now Amnoni lay on her couch, unnaturally silent, directing her mind solely to the business of their flight. But Peccary knew her better. The problem had disturbed them all. Tasper's replacement had been selected, Amnoni had called it imposed, by the Court of Principals with no consultation with the crew. He came from a newly prosperous family in the pasture belt valleys, and his hair was almost as red and flame gold as that of the crew's pilot. He immediately proved himself an excellent time theorist. His mind was sharp and strong-willed, responsive to decision-making, but it was also cold. It sat uneasily in the telepathic pool. His shared thoughts could be abrupt and angry, too much the individual. In short, Chronaut Vale Voriansti Cheverel was an intruder, and worse, the pilot did not like him. The mission and all their lives lay in the hands of a 4-year-old innocent who must not be provoked, and provocation seemed to be Vale's forte. Faced with the prospect of hurled toys, temper tantrums, and the possible disintegration of his crew, Peccary directed the thought core towards the function of the scaphe. An adequate solution. It held together, but it was no longer the team he had built. 2 minutes since immersion. Monitor units, set around the tight walls of the scaphe, registered and recorded the crew's every movement and reaction, both physical and mental. Scientific specimens in a sealed environment, a cradle of the future. Plant seeds in temporal isolation tanks germinated, grew, flowered and ripened their fruits even as the chronauts watched. A specimen tafelshrew fell accidentally from its exercise wheel and died, its body withering away in a mouldering storm of high-speed decay. Its mate gave birth and weaned its young, 30 days in 30 minutes. These were the easy trials. Worse by far were the missions when the scaphe was immersed in vortex for 90 days isolation, to return only 90 minutes after its departure. The captain put out of his mind that the scaphe should make time fall some when or where. Such plans were as yet as an impossibility. This phase of the time programme was barely the equivalent of the first space flights, carrying lone heroes strapped into tin canisters on single orbits of Gallifrey. One day, this work would also seem primitive. Nevertheless, the prospect of a detour into the future to see where their labours would lead amused him greatly. Pleasing thought, agreed Regulator Chespearl. She turned her head to grin at Chronaut Riogus, who lay on the next couch. Riogus Talim Lacotte, the battery of the scaphe, a big-framed hulk of a man, tall as a Pythia, on whom all the telepathic energetics of the crew were focused, channelled into the ship's drive impulse. I lay odds they don't tell us when they do it. A Deepak to a dumpling, the Pythia smothers the opposition before we get back. His fingers were linked between the couches with chess-pearls, low down where the others could not see. And you'll miss Rassilon's public stoning. Her thoughts teased at him. I'm sure his head'll still be on a pole when we get back. Or we could always go now. And who's going to persuade the pilot? Interrupted Amnoni. There was a note of disapproval in her thoughts. The pilot is the only one concentrating, said a voice out loud. It was a habit that Vale had picked up to annoy them when they excluded him from their thoughts. He watched them from his couch with the air of a dispassionate sneer. They stared back awkwardly, hiding their feelings behind smiles of concern. Chespearl put out a thread of warmth and friendship. It was turned away. In his playpen at the heart of the ship, the pilot had become very quiet. At that moment, Peccary caught the first intimations of approaching danger. Since he sensed it, they all knew. With a smirk, Vale turned on his couch. Pulling at the monitor leads on his arms, he knelt up and looked over the top of the hollowed hub at the pilot. "Hello, little one," he said coldly. "Still missing Nanny?" The child, knowing things that grown-ups forgot, had been gazing up at the lights in the spheric pool. He stared at his tormentor with widening eyes and pulled his toys in close for protection. The ship's lights guttered and the hum of the power drive fluctuated for a moment. "Vale!" The warnings the crew sent out were ignored. The pilot whimpered in anticipation of a blow. Vale's hand darted out and snatched away one of the toys. The child's eyes filled with a hatred that was frightening in one so innocent. The time scaphe lurched as the guiding concentration fell apart. Peccary struggled to assert an order, but "We travel" was lost. Ryogus launched out of his seat. "Leave him alone, you little sheet snacker," he shouted, pulling Vale away by the head. The pilot screamed with fright. The chamber lights dimmed and the spheric pool filled all the chamber with the streaming light of the vortex.